Tech Sounds presents EduTrends.
Welcome to EduTrends, presented by the Institute for the Future of Education. This is a Tech Sounds podcast, the official platform of podcasts of Tecnológico de Monterrey. I am José Pepe Escamilla, Associate Director of the Institute for the Future of Education. Today's guest is Liz Reisberg, a consultant and member of the advisory board of the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College. Liz, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I would like to start with a personal question for you. What inspired you to pursue a career in education? What sparked your interest?
It was an interesting question, Pepe, because I was going to avoid education because when I was growing up, the only professions open to women were teaching and nursing. And I was a young feminist, and I didn't want to do anything that was traditional. And yet I found myself drawn back to education over and over again. I believe in, I guess it's my idealism. I believe that if we're going to have healthy societies, it has to be developed through our school systems from the time children go to pre-K through university. So I guess in the end, it was my idealism that dragged me back to a traditional career in education, even though I tried very hard to avoid it.
Very interesting answer. And what sparked your interest in Latam?
Uh, that's another interesting question. I was very fortunate in high school that there was an agreement between my high school, and an institute in Saltillo in northern Mexico. They would receive a student every year, and my high school had a scholarship to send somebody for 2 months studying Spanish and Mexican history and living with a Mexican family. And I was desperate to earn that scholarship, and I was successful that year. So that summer that I spent in Saltillo gave me the gift of being welcomed into a family like I was, a member, like a daughter. And it gave me the gift of another language. And it really was life changing. It opened a window to other cultures, mostly Spanish speaking cultures, that I came home and continued to pursue.
That's a very testing experience, or also life-changing experience when you can travel and be immersed in another culture. Well, as you know, in Latin America, as in other areas of the world, inclusion is something very important in education, and in particular in higher education. The Institute for the Future of Education has 4 key themes that forms an acronym FAIR. Now we say education has to be fair. F stands for fit for purpose, A for adequate, I for inclusion, and R for relevant. So I would like to go into the I of inclusion. So uh, what do you think are the things that we can do to break down those barriers for access and equity in higher education?
I think about this a lot, and I think it's a very complicated challenge to address. And especially so because as we have increased participation in higher education, we have an enormous amount of diversity in the students who are arriving at the beginning of university. So that they come with different cultural backgrounds, different social backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, and most importantly, different academic backgrounds. And it makes it really difficult for us to address inclusion with a single formula. And I've seen a variety of approaches. I think in many countries, Argentina, for example, inclusion means having um, open admission, that anyone coming out of secondary school can go to university, as though that makes opportunity equal for everybody. But it's so much more complicated than that, as we recognize the different levels of preparation from different kinds of secondary schools, that to just include somebody or make it possible for someone to have access is really not a sufficient commitment to truly achieving equity. One of the programs I like the most and admire the most is one that was started in Brazil by the university in Campinas, Unicamp, called Profis, and I'm trying to remember what it stands for, and I don't remember. But it's was a program that at the university, they recognized that even though they were a public university and it was free, the study was free, there was no tuition charged. Um, they had a very competitive admissions exam to enter, and something like 80 or 85% of the students who entered were coming from private education. So they were taking children who had had a privileged education and giving them a free education, where children who had free education couldn't compete to get admission. And they realized that they had almost no one from the surrounding town of Campinas who was entering the university. So it was really a question of, poorly serving their immediate environment. So they created this program it was very controversial because what they ended up doing was offering admission to the top graduating student in each class in each secondary school in Campinas. And I think in the first year it was 120 schools, and they offered the admission to the person who was at the top of their class. Not unlike what they did in Texas, where they were trying to include more people by saying if you were in a certain percentage at the top of your class, you could be admitted to the Texas system. But Unicamp didn't stop there. They explained to these students that they were going to have 2 additional years of study before they entered the university without charge. And it was a recognition that if you have 12 years of inadequate education, you can't compensate for that in a summer or with being tutored while you're trying to continue in your career. So what Unicamp did was they created an interdisciplinary program, very demanding, with studying humanities and sciences and history, sociology. They put students into groups of cohorts. They were accompanied throughout, where the supervision, the monitoring was constant, so that if students stopped coming into class or started to have academic difficulties, there could be an intervention very, very quickly. And they also, by establishing cohorts, wanted these students to find peers who would provide them with support when they continued on to the university, because many of these students had never been exposed to peers who had the opportunity to ski in Switzerland on their vacations. So that there was this huge social cultural gap between most of the students who were then enrolled in Unicamp and these students that they were trying to include. They also provided financial assistance to pay for transportation from home to the campus, also a certain allowance to make sure that these students could study full time and didn't have to work to help to support their families, so that they really freed the constraints that would inhibit academic success for the group of students that were part of the Profis program. And they provided them with all kinds of counseling, academic support, peer support, and most importantly, a very rich academic program. And in the very beginning, very high percentage of these students were able to complete the 2-year program and continuing on to the university. And many of them entering into some of the most competitive programs in the university, such as medicine and engineering, and with very high levels of completion. So that, the recognition was that if we're truly committed to inclusion, to equity, we really have to recognize the complexity of what it is to bring students who've been marginalized, who've not had access, and we have to consider programs that will make it possible for them to be truly successful. There were some videos with the first couple of cohorts finishing their university degree. I mean, it just would move you to tears of these, very modest families celebrating graduation, of these children who could never have aspired to a university with the prestige of Unicamp without this program, but who had not only aspired, but succeeded. And it really represented an enormous commitment on the part of the university. And, most universities don't make that level of commitment. It usually are tutoring centers where the student themselves has to know, I'm in trouble. I have to make an appointment to go to a center and get tutoring, where these students were followed closely enough that someone else recognized when they were starting to get into trouble. And there were early interventions to make sure that they didn't get themselves into a difficult hole to dig out of. So it was really encouraging students to develop confidence, self-esteem, and success. So that's one kind of equity. It's a long answer to your question. Can I keep going?
Let me tell you something. I found this example that is very interesting because most of the universities, we believe that by providing a scholarship to a student that comes from one of those communities, we have done our job. No, it's we have admitted the student and we have given the scholarship. We have a program with that is targeted at the students that come from the lowest decile of the population. Those are brilliant students, but nevertheless they have gaps, no, in their
Yeah.
and one of them is social cultural gaps, social capital, no, so that they don't have anyone, their families or entourage that has gone through university, etc. And also other kinds of gaps in terms of skills, soft skills or disciplinary skills. So what we do in this program is we do a lot of assessment at the beginning of the students, and then we provide individual opportunities for the students to develop those skills, but also mentoring during their stay in the university. And we have achieved a higher level of graduation rate on those students that come from that population than from another. So it's very it gives me hope that there's this kind of programs in public universities like Campinas, which is a very high level university in the region, that are looking at giving more opportunities to people. I will move to another question that we can eventually relate, which is right now in education there are many trends. No, one of them is the adoption of AI, but there are other trends related to mainly the use of technology because um, education is one of the biggest sectors if we talk about expenditure. No, it's very big, and it's very adoption of technology is very low for education, and AI is one of the things that we're talking a lot right now. So what are the challenges there? What are the opportunities? And there is some opportunities for inclusion also in the use of these technologies.
I think the challenge right now is huge, partly because of the speed at which new technology is emerging. In the beginning, I mean, because I do a lot of training in at different universities, I felt like it was imperative for me to try to keep up with new educational technologies that were coming onto the market. I've given up. There's no way that I can keep up with the technology available for improving teaching, for administering. It's just coming way too fast. And I have the time and enough technical background to learn these new technologies. We're dealing with not only in Latin America, but in the United States, a generation of people teaching who grew up and were educated before these technologies even existed. Many faculty today are teaching who didn't even have the internet when they finished university. So we have this enormous gap in the students who are growing up with technology, faculty who are scrambling to learn it when this is all new, even at a most basic level. We have a lot of faculty who think that if they use PowerPoint, they've mastered technology. And we have a long way to go before we can integrate technology more effectively into university teaching, strategies for assessment, more efficient administration. I mean, there's just technology is just available to us in so many different areas of higher education, and it's coming at a very high speed. The question is, do we have time to learn it? One of the things that it always surprises me when I do workshops is that a lot of faculty really don't even understand how to use Google. People just go out and do a search without recognizing all the biases that are built into the Google algorithm. The fact that Google will identify your IP address and where you're located, and a lot of the results that are returned to you might be based on previous searches on your current location. There are just so many assumptions kind of built into those algorithms, and it's really imperative for professors to learn how to write a search string to get more complete, more accurate information, less biased information. And if the professors don't know how to do that, how are they going to teach their students? And we live in a world where people are getting misinformation, distorted information, biased information. And if we don't teach how to do searches, to do accurate, unbiased, to collect accurate, unbiased information, where are students going to learn that before they go out into the world? And so if the teachers don't know that, how are they going to teach their students? And if we're not dominating technology at that very basic level, what are we going to do with AI, as we start to use that? And then there's this whole other area of AI that relates to a book that I that collaborated on about the way that AI and technology is helping students cheat. And we have an epidemic of cheating. It's becoming normalized where students all over the world are saying, if I can do this and it's a shortcut, why not? Everybody else is doing it. So, we have education, we have technology as a tool, and we have all these huge gaps, among the people who need to be using this technology, but don't have adequate background to use it well. And then we have this other area of cheating that's affecting the quality of student engagement, affecting research results. I mean, so they're just, I feel like sometimes we're being hit by a tidal wave of new technologies and we don't really have adequate ways of responding.
It's very very interesting that your answer and their challenges, and I will make a double reflection there. No? So one is um, what do we need to train professors in these aspects, and in general. We assume that most of our professors in universities are doing research and they are not interested in getting some training, no? So learning new tricks, particularly about education. And the other one is uh, how can we deal with that use of technology by the students and take advantage of that because they will be living in a world that is immersed of AI in their work, in their lives. So I tell this story. I've told this story before in other podcasts. So I apologize for those who have heard this. When I went to the university, my math professor didn't let me use the scientific calculator because a good engineer had to know how to use the slide rule. So that professor didn't um, forecast that the slide rules would be no longer fabricated, no manufactured in like 3 years after that, because of the prevalence of scientific calculators and then computers and then simulators and now AI. No, so isn't it that we have to embrace and adapt to the use of those technologies and understand what are the things that students have to do with technology, and the student what are the things that they have to learn the skills without the use of technology? Maybe we're not there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to make training and orientation available easily to everybody, to faculty and to students. We also need to be beginning to sort out where the ethical boundaries are. It's not easy. When is using AI cheating and when is it a tool? And it's not always so clear. And I think that these are discussions we need to be having on our campuses, so that there are guidelines and clear, codes of practice that need to be revisited as technology continues to advance. And those conversations aren't happening on enough campuses with enough participation at the moment. But there needs to be, training centers, resource centers where people can go and not necessarily have to dedicate an entire day or a week to training, but maybe do short workshops and be able to do that to easily fit into a schedule that's already complicated, to begin to learn more about, both things, how to use technology, what the abuse of technology is, and how it might be incorporated in that individual person's research or teaching.
Thank you for your answer, please. One of the challenges that higher education has right now, it's the the value of it. No, so why higher education is still important and relevant. Uh, I think that one easy one could be because of the return, no, the return of it in terms of how much I earn with a degree and not a degree. But there have been some information and media, no, that say that the return is not there. But there may be other things that higher education brings to people. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Why higher education is still relevant, or how can we change higher education to make it still relevant in the future?
Yeah, I think higher education has to adapt. I think we've worked on a traditional model that goes back almost to the University of Bologna that, needs a lot of reflection and reconsideration. Um, for I think higher education in its ideal form creates people who are capable of learning, capable of thinking, and capable of participating in civil society. That's not happening as successfully as one might hope. I think that there's a lot of things that take place, a lot of learning that takes place outside the classroom that's been really important to the traditional model of going to college for 4 years, 5 years, that has to do with extra activities, with involvement with peers, involvement with social activities, with social justice activities. There's a lot of things that happen along the way to the degree. But that model isn't working for everybody. And it's also gotten, certainly in the US, very expensive. And many people come to college and they're not ready to have that experience. They're going to college because they were told that's what you have to do to have a good life. You have to go. And maybe we need to break down college into shorter pieces to give people a chance to learn, work, understand what else they want to learn, what else they want to experience, come back to school and continue on. There's a lot of conversation in the United States about creating on ramps and off ramps. And, making colleges, for some people who know, I want to go to college, this is why I'm 18 years old, I'm ready. And then there are other people who are going because they're supposed to. And that's not necessarily the best next step if you're not really clear about why you're going. If you're going only to get a certificate, to get a job, you're not going to really benefit from all the other things that take place during the college experience. And maybe we need to make it possible for people to do the piece that they want, work a little bit, experience a little bit more of life, come back and bring those experiences to continue advancing. So I think that what we need to do to really make the college experience more valuable is make it more adaptable and flexible to accommodate different needs of different people at different stages of their life. I have to say, I am a little worried about the micro credential movement. I think it's just like AI. I think it's here. It's important. It's going to be an important part of the post secondary experience. The question is, where does it fit? And if you're focusing exclusively on developing a skill, which is what the micro credential generally does, you're not learning all of those soft skills that really come with a larger, more complete college experience. So we have to figure out how to put all these pieces together to help develop the kinds of citizens that we want to have in our societies.
It's interesting that we always talk about the university as if it is not the real world, no, real world life. So why university has to be so detached from the real world? That could be a good question also.
Yeah, well, the tech is doing a great job by integrating work experiences and real world experiences with the academic programs. But very few universities are doing that. There's tons of research that talks about the importance of internships, co-ops, the kind of consulting projects, all these things that you can do to integrate those opportunities with the academic curriculum, and how much more effective university education is when students have those opportunities. But yet it's still a relatively small percentage of universities that offer that.
Yes, yeah, I agree with you. I um I wanted to ask you once again about the training part of professors. So there are many things going on right now, and uh, what do you think it's the 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 kind of needs that professors have right now, and are we being able to cope with all the demands on training that the professors have?
Um, yeah, we're not able to cope with all the demands that professors have. One of the things I said at the conference in Monterey in January is if I was young and starting out today, I don't know if I would pursue an academic career looking at the, just exploding expectations of professors. I mean, there's a lot right now in the academic press about how stressed our students are. And slowly we're starting to see coverage of how stressed faculty is. We're asking a lot. We're asking professors to be effective as teachers. We're asking them to be researchers. We're expecting them to do a lot of things. We want them to learn new technology. We want them to integrate new technology. We want them to learn more effective mechanisms for assessment. They need to do ongoing assessment. They need to transition their course material from content to skills and competencies, and they need to be able to evaluate those. And, we have all of these expectations, and on top of that, we're asking them to address the emotional and emotional needs of their students, for which almost none of them are prepared. And, so we're asking a lot. And I think what we need to do is, I mean, my own personal feeling is that we need to offer more support to our faculty, more emotional support, more professional support. And it's really difficult because in Latin America, a very high percentage of the faculty is part-time. So when are they going to add in this piece of, getting support if they are working as professionals outside and teaching one course, and yet in this one course they're expected to do all these different things. It just we really, but I feel like we've got to figure out some way because we're gonna lose our most talented faculty. They're gonna burn out. It's already happening. There was a lot about the big quit in the US, and I don't know if it happened in Latin America, but it just was too stressful. So, I don't have any magic answers about this, but I do think we need to rethink what we expect from our professors and how are we going to support them so that they can deliver the results that we want with a minimum amount of stress. And there will always be stress, but I think right now the stress is a little overwhelming for a lot of teachers. And plus, we have this public blowback where the public is suddenly questioning what is the value of this anyway. So, in addition to all these crazy expectations, they're undervalued. And it's a really difficult position to be in.
Yes, I think there's also the other change is the change in the discipline, no, which is also uh, how to do business with AI, for instance, or how to do uh, journalism with in a world immersed with technologies, AI and others. So the disciplines are also changing as another thing they have to cope with. And we know that people can be under stress, but as long as what they do is fulfilling, it helps a lot to reduce the burnout, no? Because also education has these cycles, no? The cycles of the academic year or the academic semester, no? And when you what you do is something that is fulfilling. Generally, the aftertaste that you got out of that is something that you're proud of. No, I did
Yes.
that. It was stressful, but I'm proud. But you
Yes.
said that right now that education is under questioning. I don't know how that helps, and maybe that's also part of the big quit. We are arriving at the end of our conversation, Liz, and I would like to ask you a last question. Also, we are talking about the challenges on higher education in terms of the value and also the retaining our talent and training our professors, inclusion of our students, but many other like a global challenge. No, climate change, reduction of budget, aging population in many countries, even in Latin America. No, our population is aging very fast, more faster than what happened in the U.S., in Europe. I don't know, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and also some fights between countries, nationalism. So we are in a very complex war. I remember I read VUCA 15 years ago or something like that, and it's a military term, no? And I say, well, maybe this is a little bit exaggerated. I think we're living in a VUCA war right now, no? Very, very complex. So what is your take on this, and what do you think that higher education institutions can do right now to...
It is a very complicated situation, and, some mornings I wanna wake up and just cry. I mean, the fact that the United States is turning on its best friends, Mexico and Canada right now, and creating all of this bad feeling when, we're an integrated region. It just doesn't make any sense to me. We're integrated for mobility of scholars and mobility of products. It's just to create these tensions between countries, is just it's incomprehensible to me that this is what we're doing, but I think it's happening in Europe as well. There's a kind of growing nationalism that kind of is maybe it's backlash to, I mean, my experience on higher education was when we're celebrating internationalization and how important this is to bring the world together and to respect each other's cultures and to learn from each other and to be together to collaborate on research and to study together in the classroom. And, all of this is now under siege, and being questioned, if not inhibited. We suddenly don't want Chinese scholars in our classrooms. I mean, when there's been so much benefit from so much collaboration over the last couple of decades, um, things like addressing climate change at universities is now becoming considered woke. So we're not supposed to talk about climate change anymore. Um, Equity and inclusion, which was, such an important dimension of how we were going to improve participation in higher education, is now being shut down in the United States. Um, we're kind of we're I think we're fighting dragons that don't exist, and I don't know how the university defends itself in the face of this onslaught. I'm really worried about it. It takes a huge amount of courage from university leadership, and often university presidents are in the line of fire from politicians with a lot of influence. I wish I had the answer. I think we have to trust our universities to find the courage to stand up for a better future. And that means considering all the things that you mentioned. And it's going to just be that much more difficult in the current context, which is really unfortunate. But we need to seguir adelante. We need to continue the fight.
We're an optimist. And if you're in education, you're an optimist. You're in the work field. Thank you very much, Liz, for your insight, for your time, and for sharing these points of view, challenges, opportunities, and innovations on the educational landscape.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed being here.
For more information, visit observatory.tech.mx/EduTrends podcast and ife.tech.mx. A special thanks to Tecnológico de Monterrey, the Institute for the Future of Education, and the Tech Sounds team. EduTrends producers Esteban Venegas and Christian Igosa. Stay tuned and play Tech Sounds in your favorite podcast app for other great shows and content.